Hello, this will be part 8 in the series, New York and the Hermetic Code. Hopefully I can wrap it all up and say this will be the second last. But now we're going to start looking at the street plans and how they connect to the architecture as well. Anyway, so what we have is the street layout, and this is Manhattanhenge. So on the solstice, or as it's called, Manhattanhenge, along 42nd Street, the sun will set on the solstice, or just around the solstice, right down the middle. But if we go back in time to the second half of the 1600s, and originally New York was New Amsterdam, it was part of the Dutch Empire, and early at that point, basically only the southern tip of Manhattan was part of this city, and what is now Wall Street was actually a wall which divided the settled part from the rest. Now, around about that time, we also see this map, and we see in the centre the rosette. So we have 32 rays, 32 sun rays around a 33rd central point. This is an ancient mapping technique, Porterland mapping, for instance, and it goes back to the Perry-Reese maps and these very enigmatic ancient mapping systems. And what will be a link, because I'll be talking a little bit about the UN building, but we even have the UN map, which divides the world into 32 sectors around a 33rd central point. And this is a very important reoccurring theme throughout the esoteric architecture mapping systems and weights and measures as well. But now we have where Wall Street is now on the southern tip of Manhattan, and there has been some land reclamation. So the map here might not be aligned 100% perfectly, but just to illustrate the point of what was the original New Amsterdam, where the wall was, which the wall of the city, and how Wall Street got its name. And so just to get a better view, so it was the 1662, I'm sorry, I can't remember the exact date, but yeah, this was during New Amsterdam, the Dutch period, such as Peter Stuyvesant, and so like there's still quite a bit of Dutch influence and legacy in New York. Then we moved to 1776 and the founding fathers of the United States, which were a large part of them Freemasons, but we also had influence of other groups. The Bavarian Illuminati, most of the internet stuff is sort of this spooky devil stuff, but Bavarian Illuminati were basically, their ideals was very much in line with the ideals of the American Republic. So as we have now from Google, the Google Maps has Manhattan Island is now, and in 1807 up to 1811 there was something called the Commissioner's Plan. So basically the street plan of Manhattan was laid down formally in 1911, which is interesting because well, I've done other videos in regards to Governor Morris, the Freemason here in Australia, and his influence in regards to street plans. Now, Governor Morris was one of the founding fathers. He was part of the Commissioner's Plan, which did this design. And George Washington himself was very much into survey and design. This is very much a very important theme. So it wasn't just about creating a nation on a legal social sense, it was also the designing a perfect city. And no interesting point was the standard street block, 264 by 900. Now, the southern tip was already laid out, but basically the most of the New York grid plan was laid out along this 264 by 900 feet street plan, which again corresponds so much to other videos I've done, especially here, Governor Morris. But the interesting point in regards to the Commissioner's Plan was that the street grid was tilted, so 29 degrees from east to west, so just to give a clue there. Now this was done for a very important and, well, for instance, a practical reason, but also an astronomical reason, and in that sense, a hermetic reason. And that was why on the solstice, we have what's called Manhattanhenge down 42nd Street. Even that's important because the corner, where does 42nd Street lead? It leads to the UN headquarters in New York. The main architect was Oscar Niemeyer. Now, he's a very important figure as well in this wider Hermetic code across the world. But consider, like the UN, you could almost call it this, the headquarters in New York is essentially, you could say, the world government building. And again, the UN flag, this 32 over 33 or 32 around the 33rd point, is very a consistent theme going back centuries, millennia actually. One of the key features of the UN building, not so well known, is the Japanese peace bell. Now, the bell is rung on the opening of each General Assembly, but it's also rung on the vernal equinox. And another key feature, again, the Great Pyramid encodes so much of this. It's a textbook for the Hermetic code, and on the vernal equinox, the shadow of the Great Pyramid shows that it's an 8-sided pyramid. It's a masterpiece of engineering, but the bell itself, which this will connect to the Great Pyramid, so the bell is 3 1/4 by 2 feet. The Great Pyramid is at this phi proportion, so 1/1.618181818. Now, there's a lot more into it. I've done some videos on the exact measures on the pyramids, and it gets much better, but in connection to the Fibonacci's, well, the peace bell ratio is 13:8. 13:8, both of them are Fibonacci numbers, so it's, again, it fits within this phi spiral. So it's not technically actually phi, but it is part of a Fibonacci spiral, which is one way of illustrating the phi proportion. The Great Pyramid is at a proportion of 89:55, which gives us 1.618, as you can see here. So this is a consistent theme throughout the architecture, the street plan, symbolic methods, all sorts of things. But the UN building itself also corresponds to this design. So we see each section of the UN building, again, is accurately described by the Fibonacci spiral, or the golden ratio, or the divine proportion, whatever number you choose. But the building as a whole also sits within this same method. So we have the peace bell, we have the building, and we also, again, constant connections to the Great Pyramid. Now, the link will be in the description. It's an excellent video because I've done one on Disney as well, and I'll try to remember to put the link in there, because Disney's architecture and symbolism was way into the Hermetic code, without a doubt. Club 33, all these other parts. But the UN Security Council, I'll put a link to Scott Onstott's when he discusses these as well, because, well, for instance, the mural there in the Security Council is a Vesica Pisces. Now, the mural itself contains a lot of symbolic information, but also the General Assembly building. Every time the General Assembly building meets, they ring the bell, and they also ring it on the vernal equinox. But that's 165 feet long, another key connection, and towards the end I'll try and remember to go into that. But if we go back to the UN building, the main architect, Oscar Niemeyer, who was very strongly influenced by the important architect Le Corbusier, and there we see his modular, and how he himself was very much into the golden ratio, the phi proportions. Architects want to create the perfect proportions. This is not some kooky mystic thing. This is, it defines our reality. It defines sunflowers, typhoons and hurricanes, and galaxies themselves are defined by this proportion. It is literally the divine proportion, even if you don't want to go for that type of stuff. But Oscar Niemeyer was also one of the main architects in Brasilia. Now, there are 4 very important capital cities: Canberra, Astana, Washington, and Brasilia. Each one of them is designed on a very important geometrical but also legal setting, which sets them apart from other capital cities, and the link will be in the description there. But in the UN, we also have the Sphere Within Sphere by Arnaldo Pomodoro. His sculptures are very important. Now, it's even like it literally describes a world within a world, or a city within a city. Washington, District of Columbia; Brasilia, Federal District; Canberra, Australian Capital Territory; and Astana, the Akmola District. They are not states. They are cities within cities, or countries within countries, that have a separate legal standing, just like the City of London has, it's not part of London, it's the City of London, and has its own police force. It's a separate jurisdiction. Another sphere within sphere is to be found in Washington, DC, the District of Columbia. It's not a state, it's a district. This is another sphere within sphere by Arnaldo Pomodoro. This is in the Vatican. The Vatican is a country within a country, a sphere within a sphere. It's distinctly different in a very important legal standpoint, as not just in the architecture, which defines all of these very important cities. Now, Versailles, for instance, is another example, but that will be described in the link. But so, here's an image from Google Earth, and what we see there, the UN building, and we're looking down 42nd Street and well, even 42nd Street, that it was chosen, and I have to say chosen for a very important reason, to create this Manhattanhenge on the summer solstice. So we have an astronomical connection with in there the solstice, but on the equinox we have the Japanese peace bell being rung as well. So a double, the solstice and the equinox, the longest day and the equinox when days are equal. These are again constant themes throughout so much of the world, ancient and modern. For instance, Stonehenge, summer solstice. It's also aligned to other key events, but also, of course, once more mentioned earlier, the Great Pyramid. These ancient structures, ancient city design from the beginning of recorded history up until this very moment continues this pattern. It's very real, it's very measurable, it's very testable, just like the architecture, and it's built into the street plan. It's not an individual building. So in the previous episodes, it's been about individual buildings, but also the UN flag 32/33, and just as another cross-reference to this. But this is about street plans. So the Hermetic Code is built from the ground up. The buildings later only reflect what's beneath. This system is, of course, the very basis of the concept of as above, so below. What we see in the heavens we bring down onto the earth, and this is very much the same principle. Hermes Trismegistus, Hermes, Mercury, Thoth, the gods of weights and measure, the god of commerce, the god of basically science, and also ties in with the sun, earth, moon and stars principles, as can be seen in the tableaus, tracing boards, Masons, Oddfellows, Rosicrucians, etc. But back to New York and Manhattan, the Manhattanhenge alignment on the summer solstice. So it's not just any day, it's arranged on a very specific day. And that brings us here. So we have 42nd Street is the focal point of Manhattanhenge, or the summer solstice alignment. And on the corner there you can see the UN building, but it also projects down. So we have Grand Central Terminal. We also have Bush Tower and the Bank of America Tower, amongst others. These are the buildings that are in previous episodes, but Grand Central Terminal, for example, has the zodiac on the roof and on the ceiling of the Grand Concourse. Now the Grand Concourse itself is both in area and in one-dimensional, connected to the number 33, very Masonic. But the UN building, well, the UN flag, 32 sectors around a 33rd central point. And again, these are just common themes, just repeated throughout the world. But the UN building mentioned earlier, the architect was Oscar Niemeyer, who's very, very important for Brasilia, a protege of Le Corbusier. But for instance, in Brasilia, he did the cathedral, the Brasilia Cathedral. Now, the columns are 33 feet apart, 66 feet, the bell tower, all the same sets of numbers that mentioned in previous episodes, but there are also 32 columns. So there's 16 columns, so, and then there are 16 panes of glass, so 32 with around a 33rd central point. Now, each of the total weight of the columns is 1,440 tons, and the Grand Concourse in Grand Central Terminal, the main concourse, is 1,440 inches wide. Now, so are all the other buildings, for instance, the Bank of America Tower and Bush Tower. But also it has a Hermes on the top, Mercury the planet, or Hermes as in Hermetic. Rockefeller Center has Hermes or Mercury or Thoth as in Egyptian, but also has this Prometheus statue with a ring around it projecting the zodiac. Once again, we see the same themes repeated. 42nd Street, Hermes Trismegistus wrote 42 books. So now we'll examine the number 42 and see how it is again repeated in these buildings, repeated in the street plan and throughout back to ancient history. So in ancient Egyptian, so the journey of the soul, there would be asked 42 questions to move through, which is a connection to Anubis as well, and I could go into that. But the Book of the Dead, spell 125, all about weights and measures. But also, I know the name of the 42 gods, etc., and I know what is the goddess of what is right. Now, in Kabbalist tradition, God created the universe with the number 42. And we also see how it's connected to the tree of life. Now, also in St. John the Divine Cathedral, now I haven't gone into it in this series, but like there are so many buildings that would be, countless hours to go through everything. But St. John the Divine, we also see on these columns the tree of life there. Now, as earlier the same, so with these certain numbers, how they reflect through all sorts of ancient traditions, even through to the Christian world. So, for instance, 42 generations before Jesus, and in Revelations, which we'll go into more as we look at New Jerusalem, but the beast will hold dominion for 42 months. Now, that's connected to the number 666, which is much more complex than what's usually discussed, because it's also in the architecture throughout New York and the world, in fact. The magic square, but we have the magic cube, 3 by 3 by 3. 42 is the sum, and one of my favourite books, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the answer to the life, universe and everything was 42. The problem was no one understood the question, and that's a nice little story there, but just worth including. It's not directly connected to the Hermetic Code, or possibly it is. Douglas Adams was a very clever man. But 42, very much connected to the Hermetic Code. Like literally there are 42 books written by Hermes and so many others. Now, the Manhattan Bridge has a Hermes sculpture, has a Vesica building to the gateway, UN building, remember the Vesica in the building, but so 336 feet, 420 Doric span, or 4,200 ionic inches. All these same structures that I've gone throughout this whole series, we see how so much knowledge is encoded in them. Now, again, Trinity Church, which I dealt with earlier, and which how connects to all these other buildings, including Bank of America Tower, countless, but that converts to 420 Doric inches once more. Statue of Liberty, I did the focus in part 1 on this. Well, the arm of the Statue of Liberty is 42 feet. Now, you might think, okay, well, that's just, again, all these are coincidences. Well, at 35 feet, the waist, we see 420 inches again. Now, all the other numbers, sun, earth, moon, and stars, how they connect through the Pythagorean harmonics series, but they also convert to this specific point. Now, George Washington Bridge, again, that was part of earlier episodes. I'll show how this connects to all across New York, to Washington, other places in the world through the number 377, the Fibonacci, but also the main span, 3,500 feet or 42,000 inches. Again, I did a focus on Sun, Earth, Moon and stars numbers into the Washington Square Arch. Now there are 55 stars, 13 large or 42 smaller stars. Now even 55 is a number, again, connects to 37, but anyway, so we see the structures of George Washington, especially connected to him, but also these other very important buildings which had so many other, these are not just sort of cherry picking the ones to fit, they all merge together, they come together, and this number 42 on 42nd Street, especially through the Freemason George Washington, who was into survey, into town design, and all these very hermetic elements. And well, you know, it's something that can be measured, can be tested, repeated. Now, for instance, George Washington, he's a tracing board like devoted to him now. Even the George Washington National Masonic Memorial in Virginia is another classic example. Well, there are countless examples across America, Australia, Canada, etc. But George Washington, a picture of when he was younger, he was a surveyor, just like Governor Lachlan Macquarie here in Australia, which is basically our equivalent of George Washington, both in survey and social aspects. But the importance of survey and design and the Hermetic Code goes back thousands of years. For instance, in Roman principles in regards to architecture and survey and town planning, you can see, well, I've done it, this would be a huge episode on its own. So this is a pattern that's you see the architects, the town planners, the financiers, etc., how it carries through. Now I began talking about the commissioner's plan for New York, 1811. Governor Morris, one of the founding fathers, who angled the streets at 29 degrees, therefore creating this for Manhattanhenge on 42nd Street, incidentally. But going again back pre-Roman times, when you have the Herma or Hermstones, which you see are very often hermaphroditic. Now, they also they're connected to the cult of Hermes, and these stones were used to define sacred precincts, not just sort of random, to define sacred areas. Now, Hermes and Aphrodite had a child, Hermes Mercury, the planet, or the element, Aphrodite Venus, the planet, or copper, the element. They had a child, Hermaphroditos, where we get the word hermaphrodite, the union of male and female, and we also see this in art forms. Very important, the male and the female and the union, but also can be extended to the sun and the moon being important elements. Sun, gold, and the moon, silver, where we get electrum, which is even depicted in the Denver airport and so many other places, AU and AG. Back to Washington, George Washington. Now the arch has Washington at war and Washington at peace. That was for the centennial of his inauguration, for the centennial of his birth. We have this statue by Greenough or Greenhouse, I'm not sure of the exact pronunciation, but that depicts Washington at war, Washington at peace, this system of duality, as above, so below, the union of male and female. This is one of these constant themes repeated throughout the Hermetic Code, alchemy, and all these other elements. But for instance, back again, the book 42 books of Hermes Trismegistus, so many other elements, of course, wrapped around 42. And Hermes Mercury is depicted in so many sculptures in New York, but these buildings being very much connected to weights and measures. 42 stars on 42 small stars on the arch. But as above, so below. This Levi's famous picture of Baphomet. Now, there's a lot of anyway, we see the Kundalini once again, or the caduceus of Hermes represented there, but also coagula on the left arm pointed down. We see the George Washington statue holds the sword there in a similar theme, but also once more this Baphomet's depicted with female breasts, and once more, like, it's again this union of male and female. Now, the tendency might be to immediately go for some sexual aspect, but it's not. It's much more. It's alchemical. There are many layers to this, and again, once the union of Hermes and Mercury, the union of male and the female, and the union of sun and moon. Now, in another very famous building, if you look up Frank Albo, has done some great work on the legislative building in Winnipeg. We have Hermes, or it's actually more Promethean, but it's a Hermetic symbol, and we have the on the bottom we have the pool of a black star with the star of Inanna, a representation of Venus. The building is at the Hermetic constant at 2 to 3. But the cornerstone was laid on the very day that Mercury and Hermes were visible in conjunction in the night sky. These are exactly the same concepts and principles which are embedded into the street plan of New York. So the summer solstice, Manhattanhenge, also the winter, but also on the vernal equinox we have the peace bell being rung at the UN building, which is aligned in this way towards these very important buildings. Now, this will be the end of this episode. I'm going to try and wrap everything up in the next episode, and to extend the street plan and to show how New York, the very street plan, embodies the same Hermetic principles that are used in both the older buildings and the new buildings, and how this architecture from the ground up encodes the Hermetic code, the Hermetic code once more, as above, so below. Sun, earth, moon, and stars, the quadrivium, multiple principles brought together, music, astronomy, arithmetic, and geometry, being through symbolism through weights and measures, through the clock and the compass, through especially geometry, and again how this method is one where multiple disciplines are brought together, and they are written in stone. They are written into the street plan, and the very same numbers that define this are also built into the geometry of, such as the vesica, from where we get the Trinity, and then we extend into the seed of life, which grows into the flower of life, which becomes the fruit of life, which embodies the 13 spheres. 13 spheres, one in the center, 12 wrap around the outside, creating the dodecahedron, for instance. But anyway, it's with that, I hope you enjoyed this episode. This will probably be the second last episode, and with that, have a good one.